Our dragons are taking flight and we're collecting resources in the Adam's Apple game, Tatsumi.
Hi, I'm Libby, this is Julian, and together we are BoxedMeeples, and today we are talking about the game Tatsumi from Adam's Apple Games. This is a game that we picked up this prototype from them at Essen, and they have crowdfunding launching very soon. In Tatsumi, you are playing as a dragon and you are moving around the board to collect elemental rings. And once you collect the rings, you can score with them and then place those rings onto your island in just the right way to get the most points.
Now, this game is on crowdfunding, so there's links in the description to find out all about that. And this is a prototype copy we're using, so bear that in mind as we're talking about the game. But this is a game you actually want. Here's 5 reasons why we really love Tatsumi. The artwork in Tatsumi is absolutely striking, and all of the work in this was done by Shirley Gong, a celebrated Southeast Asian artist.
Yes, those dragons are absolutely gorgeous.
Now, Shirley's art is traditionally inspired, but has a lovely modern twist. Now, I find dragon art kind of falls into sort of 2 camps. You get the kind of high fantasy stuff inspired by Tolkien. We all know what that looks like. It's in every sort of RPG based in that medieval time, or it's kind of the more sketchy Japanese style artwork. So to see dragons in a game that are both colourful and full of life and vibrant is actually really refreshing. And the whole of this game is a celebration of colour. All the dragons you play with, the board itself, even the things you are manipulating around the board are incredibly beautiful to look at.
They really are.
Now, in our version of the game, we of course have the plastic miniatures. They may not be plastic in the final version though. There's a debate at the moment about whether they should be wooden or whether they should be plastic. And similarly, the rings you collect from the board, should they be wooden or should they be plastic? Either way, I think this is going to be a game that ends up looking absolutely stunning. And whether they're going to be plastic or wooden, that remains to be seen. But either way, I think this is a game that's going to stand out for its visual aesthetic.
Yeah, we did see both versions at Essen and both were equally gorgeous. And I think that we're firmly sat on the fence as to which our favourite is. So one thing we always appreciate in board games, and no different in Tatsumi, is variety. And the way it does it here is really, really lovely. Of course, there are 2 sides to every dragon. You can have different movement to that dragon, different sort of special power. You can choose to play the base mode or the special mode. And that's really great. And much like in one of Adam's Apple's other games, Planet Unknown, you can play with the base island, like a planet, or you can play with the upgraded version, which has special rules, special tweaks, so you can sort of have an advanced mode with those islands as well. But the element that I find really interesting is the scales. So at the beginning of the game, you start with 5 dragon scales, and on your turn, you're going to always be flying your dragon around, and then you'll be choosing whether you're going to be collecting those elemental rings, which you're obviously going to need to score the cards. And obviously scoring the cards is then your other choice of action. And your third choice of action is this shedding scales. So throughout the game, you'll choose whether to place 1 or more, depending on the card, onto those cards to then give you another action. And there are 3 types of shed scale cards that you have in every game. And there's a variety of each type. So during the game plays, you'll have different combinations of all of these 3 different cards to give you a lot of different variety in what they do. And each of those acts a little differently. So one of them is quite often telling you to shed all your scales for a super duper power that lets you do something different throughout the remainder of the game. But it's all your remaining scales. It's not you must spend 5, which then makes it really interesting as to when you engage in that and whether you can make more out of some of the other cards that are available with their sort of one-off actions, or there's some where you place a scale and whoever's got the most scales on there by the end of the game is going to get extra points. And if you've got second most, then you can get some more. So do you just dibble into that to be able to get some points? and then spend loads on early doors, being able to have this amazing different maybe movement or something around the board, that it will allow you to have this special power? Or do you wait until much later in the game to then only have to spend one scale on the special power? But obviously at that point, you haven't had the whole game's benefit of that. So it's a really interesting choice about when you spend your scales where, and also the variety and combination of the different scales that come up. It really does add a lot of variety to the already having the different dragons, the different planets. It's the kind of variety you see in a lot of games, whereas the shed scale gives you something really extra.
And I think having this variability makes it accessible to loads of people. So if you played it loads of times yourself, you can give yourself the harder island. You can flip that over and you have to deal with the individual conditions to score on that island. It might be there's a whirlwind going on, you have to place in a certain order. You might have to alternate where you play stuff. But if that seems daunting to a new player, or they're not used to playing these kind of games, keep everything for them on the basic mode. Therefore, you just got to explain the rules and you haven't got those limitations, and that essentially levels the playing field.
It really does.
Now, as you're watching footage of this game, you might be noticing the transparent world display. Now, this looks a bit like a gimmick, doesn't it? Oh, it's got a transparent world, but it actually serves an incredibly clever gameplay mechanism. In their previous game, we had obviously the Lazy Susan when we're playing Planet Unknown, and this is a kind of similar thing. It looks cool and it's a fun mechanism, but it actually works incredibly well. Because the worlds are transparent, you can see what rings are coming up. Now that contributes significantly to the gameplay, because you know where you go somewhere, or where your opponent goes somewhere, you know what they're going to collect and also what's coming up. And once you've exhausted those rings, you put in a sand dollar in there and people can go there, but they won't get any benefit from being there. So it looks interesting on the table, but it's not just there for kind of novelty's sake. Also, with this fun world system, setup is super fast. You're just putting all of the rings on there, you're removing some for smaller player counts, just spreading them around, randomizing them, and automatically the game is set up ready to play. So it goes from shelf to table to playing incredibly fast, and each game is going to be different because it's impossible for you to get the same amount of rings in the same places in the same order. So what might look like a novelty is actually a really clever gameplay mechanic.
Yes, you can get really strategic as to your positioning. Another element of this game that we absolutely love is how the scoring works, and that sort of variety between in-game scoring and end-game scoring. So throughout the game, you are collecting your elemental rings, and you do have a maximum you can have of each colour, so you have to be careful not to hoard things, and you have to go off and then score those cards to not maximise your hand and be in a position where you can't do anything. So you are aiming for certain cards to get done, and then once you have those rings to score, you're then allowed to place them on your island. So each of the cards will tell you what colour you'll be scoring, whether it be a wild one that you're using, whether it may be a card you need 3 reds and 2 random colours. And then it will tell you you're scoring the red and you're scoring whichever wild colour that you have chosen to do as you place them onto your map. And you'll be scoring the largest group of the colour that you're allowed to score from that card. So throughout the game, do you double down on the reds, for example, and try and get a huge, great big area, so you're always scoring red, and the bigger that group manages to get, the bigger the score you're getting each round? The problem with that is that at the end of the game, you're actually scoring the board based on the number of the circled rings around the edge of all of those different colours. So you do have to make sure that you are managing to sort of fill some of that in. And the scoring cards that come up have that variety. So you might be able to place your 3 red rings. And then towards the beginning of the game, that's great. That's really what you want. And then towards the end of the game, you might actually be wanting to take those rings that have just one of every colour in order to be able to fill up the rings around the edge to really hike up your end game scoring. And you're more able to place them at that latter end of the game. And you can be adding 3-4 points per colour by just being able to place one of those cards out and get those down and cover those the way you need to do. So it's really interesting, the strategy of terms of what cards you're going for when and how you're choosing to score in-game versus knowing what's coming at the end of the game and how you need to score then too.
Yeah, there's always been such a switch as we are playing. So often who's leading through the game doesn't necessarily do well with their combination set collecting at the end. And similarly, collecting the different scale points, how they contribute to the in-game score and can completely shift the flow of the tide. So someone who is winning might end up being the losing player. Now, as Libby said, every single turn you have to fly your dragon, and you fly in a straight line, either one direction or another. You can fly as far as you want, but you have to go in a straight line. There's no turning in this game unless you've bought that ability.
Yes, and I did have that one in one game and it was epic.
So in a two-player game, it feels like a race.
Yes.
You know what the objectives are. You want to get to them as quickly as possible, stopping your opponent from getting those scoring points. But when you increase the player count, the game changes. And that's where the ability to block an opponent kicks in, because you can't fly through another dragon. And similarly, there's no combat, so you can't take on another dragon. But obviously, you know what scoring is available, and you can see what your opponent dragons have got. So you can quickly work out what they need to get. And if what they need to get ends up being behind you, they can't get it. So what turns from a race in two players quickly shifts into a how can I advance my agenda, but also stop my opponent from doing what they want to do.
And I think you do that in a two-player game as well. It's just your positioning might not be so tight that you can do it as often. I mean, certainly I've got in your way before, knowing that we'd both be looking for the new card. And if I position myself there, I can gather then, stop you from getting it from your next turn, and I can swoop in and grab the thing that I know you want on my following turn. And you do have that opportunity in two, but in higher player counts, so much more getting in each other's way, or forcing people to have to be somewhere where there are sand dollars and it's an empty dwell, so you know that they won't be as efficient when having to gather. So that was our 5 reasons why we've really enjoyed playing this prototype copy of Tatsumi by Adam's Apple Games. And as I have said, it is a prototype. Of course, we don't yet know whether the game will go down the wooden or the plastic path. So we'll see about that in crowdfunding. So do bear in mind that all of our images that we've used are based on the prototype copy that we've had. The rules are still in flux, so there may even be some tweaks and changes to how we've described things that might be different for the final version.
Of course, if you're interested in getting this game, do follow the links down below for the crowdfunding campaign if it's still active, or for post-campaign ways of buying this game. Of course, if you're new to us and you've not seen us before, I'm Julian, this is Libby, and we post a board game video right here on YouTube at least once a week. And we are always talking about board games, reviewing content, playing content, just discussing the whole culture of board games. So if that's your kind of thing, do consider subscribing and ringing the bell for notifications of every time we post a new video.
Yes, we'd love to hear from you.
But as always, thank you so much for watching.
Bye.